and make it a little easier for everybody to hear me here and everything. So I want to welcome you all to coming out here and everything. I really appreciate you all coming out today. And kind of my quick little background. I've been teaching the history of rock and roll at Stephen F. State University since I think 2002. I've been there since 1999, and so I have a big passion for making independent films. I made a science fiction film called The Rise of the Robots, and I got a background in music. I got a degree in films. I got a bunch of degrees. So let's kind of just dive into this a little bit, and I'm going to kind of just start off with the beginnings of what actually rock and roll actually is. And I think a nice little definition of it is it's popular music usually played on electric amplified instruments characterized by persistence, heavily accented beat, repetition of simple phrases, and often this folk and blues elements. So the idea of having this country music, rhythm and blues, and I also put this 50s pop music in there as well as kind of a definition. I get asked often a lot, what is rock and roll? And to me, a lot of times when folks take my rock history class, they basically think, hey, it's this classic rock, but it's basically everything that's popular. And right now, for the young people that's in here, you're listening to music that your parents and your parents listen to music your grandparents didn't like, and it keeps on going. It's always the next generation, and you kind of get to the point, there's no melody, there's no rhythm there, and exactly, you don't get it. It's for the next generation that comes around. And some of this music that I'm going to play for you, it was like from another planet at one point. I like talking about the music of the vernacular versus music of the cultivated. So the music that's out today, and some of the young people that are here, who are the big artists right now that's in the pop charts right now? So Sabrina Carpenter, Taylor Swift. Okay, Baby No Money? So these folks are on the charts right now. So this is the music of the vernacular, and what the vernacular means is the common language, the common tongue. And so this is the music that's out at one point. But at one point, Mozart wrote an opera, and people used to go to operas. So that was the music of the vernacular at one point. But at some point, it switched from being the vernacular to the cultivated. And what I mean by that is that at some point, this music that we care about a great deal, we want to keep it around. So in the classical time period, anybody want to guess how many symphonies were written during Mozart's period, Haydn's period? Hundreds? It was about 12,000. Today, how many of those symphonies are actually played today? Anybody want to guess? Would you say 10? It's close, about 50. A couple from Beethoven, a couple from Mozart, the unfinished Schubert symphony. Anyway, there's a handful of them. Does that mean the other 12,000 weren't good? But there's something about those 50 that have stood the test of time that becomes part of our culture, that we want to cultivate. When we cultivate crops, we want to make sure they grow and we care about them. And so keep that in mind, that when I go back to the 50s, at one point this was the vernacular, and at some point some of these sounds we still have today, or you can hear vestiges of these sounds even later on as well. So I won't dive into this a great deal, but I think for a lot of the young people here that haven't been exposed to rock and roll, this is all pre-rock and roll. Let me start off a little bit with Patti Page here. So here's rhythm and blues. And then we got some country and western there as well. So these three elements. So if you can listen to that, and I have a whole lectures on this, because of time we were saying, so I'm just kind of giving you a little bit of a touch of this. The really hip swinging country going on, the big swing going on, along with the rhythm and blues, and how much is that dog in the window. So just remember, back in the pre-rock and roll, that was the music they were listening to on the radio at the time there. Then Elvis comes around, and he was able to synthesize a lot of this music, and he gets the kind of the moniker of the king of rock and roll. And if you go and study, Elvis was at the right place at the right time with the right what I call it factor. There's something about Elvis that people like. He had this energy that people just liked him. And if you don't believe it, go back and watch some of these videos of the young people just going mad for him. And there was just something about his energy, his look, and he was at the right place at the right time. So here is, this is that Sun recording of That's All Right. And you hear elements of country and western, rhythm and blues, and I even say like 50s pop music.
Well, that's all right, Mama. That's all right to you. That's all right, Mama. You stay any way you do, and that's all right. That's all right. That's all right, Mama. Any way you do.
So if you, yes?
I'd say there's one more factor in Elvis' popularity. He was a white boy singing black music.
And at the time, like Little Richard was, I'll talk about it in a moment, he was, like Pat Boone would take some of his covers, some of his songs like Tutti Frutti. And at the time, he was kind of upset because that was his chance to become like a star. If you go study the history, there was certain music on pop radio stations. If I remember right, there was about 12 rhythm and blues stations all in the United States. That was it. And even some of the rhythm and blues stations wouldn't play some of the rhythm and blues music because it was just too suggestive. And
Race music.
yeah, absolutely. So with Elvis, he was able to synthesize this and was at the right place at the right time. If it wasn't for Elvis, somebody else probably would have came along, but he was, sometimes you have these windows, and I talk about this with young people that make music or create things. If you come out 6 months earlier or 6 months later, it may not hit. There's a certain window for Supreme or Carpenter to be popular, or Taylor Swift to be popular. And if you don't get it, you just don't become famous. So here's Little Richard. And to me, you know, when I think about Little Richard, leaving home at 14, basically, out there washing dishes, and he knows in the back of his mind he's going to make it. And you heard this, and you think how much that dog in the window. This is like from another planet. Where did this music come from? And I wish I had time to play the whole record. When I heard that for the first time as a kid, I was blown away. And I heard some of these rhythm and blues pieces. And I can just imagine in the mid-50s, some young person hearing this music for the first time and thinking, what is this? What is this music? And a lot of things go on to make it where it leads on to this popular music. So I've got some other bands I'm going to kind of fast forward just a little bit. I would like to at least talk a little bit about the Kingsmen's Louie Louie, because this song is full of mistakes. And it has this energy of this music to be there. And I make an argument that these mistakes actually make magic going on. But look at that studio they had at the time, this rudimentary studio they had there. And I won't go through all of them, but like at the very beginning of it, you can hear some wrong notes. You hear that little bleep? And basically it's the same vamp. The whole song is these chords back and forth. If you play drums, same drum fill. So the drummer had one fill, and that was it. Now, the one thing on here that I think is kind of interesting, because they actually thought this song was filthy because they couldn't understand the lyrics. Well, the thing was this: the microphone was like up in the ceiling, so the guy had to point his head up there. They were recording a demo to try to get on a cruise ship, basically. They were never meant to, this song was never supposed to go out at all. And they were horrified when they actually heard it, because it's full of mistakes. So anyways, the FBI studies it because people were saying there was a bunch of bad, filthy words in it. And their analysis was, this song makes no sense, so therefore it can't be subversive. However, about 54 seconds into it, the drummer drops a drumstick and he yells out the F-bomb. And if you listen real close, you can actually hear that. Did you hear it? Let me do it one more time. So, anyways, so to me, I don't know why it gives me great joy that the F-bomb's been blowing over the FCC radio since the 60s, and there it is. One last one. The singer comes in early after the solo, and he's like, whoops. Whoops. And then, so anyways, and I make the argument that the idea of these mistakes makes the music work. And there's a lot of trial and error when you make films. There's a lot of trial and error when you make music. And sometimes the magic just comes out. So that kind of leads us to some of this cinema that has some of this rock and roll music. And for a lot of y'all that are young, no one liked it. The government didn't like it, the parents didn't like it, the schools didn't like it, the churches didn't like this music. And like within 2 years, Elvis was drafted. Basically, Buddy Holly went down in a plane crash. Little Richard threw all his rings into the river and went to the church. Chuck Berry got caught up in the Mann Act. And anyway, so all these early rock and rollers were out of rock and roll, and things just kind of calmed down in a lot of aspects. So the idea of the Blackboard Jungle actually having some of this rock and roll music from Bill Haley, and if you ever saw Bill Haley, and I guess I might show you that in a moment here, he doesn't look like the pseudo rock and roller. He's a little overweight, he's a little older looking, but the sound, that was it. And he was big in America. He was even bigger in the UK. And I think in a lot of ways, he basically spurred a lot of the young people to think, hey, I want to pick up a guitar. I want to be a rebel. I want to do these things. So in the Blackboard Jungle, which I don't know if anybody you have ever seen before, let me play a little bit of the trailer here. It even starts off saying, hey, this is rock and roll music. And even though the rest of the film really doesn't have any rock and roll music in it.
Listening to Rock Around the Clock. This is the theme music from MGM's sensational new picture, Blackboard Jungle. Many people said the story could not, must not, dared not be shown. The picture already has the movie and book world gasping. Blackboard Jungle deals with an explosive subject, the teenage terror in the schools.
So, if you looked at this terror back in 1955, I think some of y'all probably teach public school out there. You're like, yeah, that's no problem. I can handle that, So it's interesting, and the idea of these, juvenile delinquents, these young people listening to this rock and roll music, and I've been alive for a while. I kind of refuse to think that any music is going to make society end. I just don't think that any dance, any music say, well, that's it. It's been a good run, y'all. Thank you so much. Let's go on to the next society. So the Blackboard Jungle is actually a pretty good film, and there's a couple of films like Don't Knock the Rock and Rock Around the Clock that they were kind of showing this music here that, and I'll play a little bit of this and I'll fast forward just a little bit. So you can hear Bill Haley play again there.
5, 6, 7 o'clock, hit.
So you can actually see the bands playing there, and young people dancing.
I told you.
And then finally, I think to me, one of my favorite films from Elvis is Jailhouse Rock, because I think he can identify with that. The plot, basically, he gets in trouble, he goes to jail, meets his cellmate is into this new rock and roll, rockabilly type sound, basically kind of rips his sound off. He gets out, then his cellmate gets out eventually, and he wants to get paid from him. But if you see here with Elvis, Jailhouse Rock here, there's just something about him as a performer that just
Jailhouse Rock.
One through a party in the county jail. The prison band was there.
there's just something about that.
The band was jumping and the joint began to swing. You should have heard the knocked out jailbird sing like we are. Everybody let it rock. Everybody in old cell block.
I know those movements today don't look very scandalous, but back in the mid-50s, the shaking of the hips on TV, if you go watch the Milton Berle show, you can watch it on YouTube, and even Milton Berle at the time thought, this is going to be bad. Milton Berle got 400,000 pan letters, not fan letters, pan letters saying, Uncle Milty, we'll never watch your show. How dare you put that young man shaking his hips, that vulgar movements going on. And then, 2 or 3 years later, we got the twist going on, and that's all shaking your hips going on. So it's interesting to see how this music at some point changes the idea of what was perceived as morality, perceived as being some of these other aspects. So finally, let's get to some of these science fiction films and the idea of these new sounds going on, these rock and roll sounds, these electronic sounds, these recording sounds going on. One of my favorite films is Forbidden Planet. I don't know if any of y'all have ever seen it, the Icon robot and the sounds that were there. And to me, I just love that poster. And the idea of these B movies, the Forbidden Planet wasn't really a B film. A lot of young people probably don't realize as well that in the 50s, 60s, even in the 70s, people went to the cinema 3 or 4 times a week. And even in the town that I'm in, they had 5 movie theaters and drive-ins in Nacogdoches, Texas at one point. And there was the midnight movie and one like that. And so they had a bunch of films that were the expensive ones, but they also needed some of the content, so they made the B film, the film that wasn't as high budget because they just needed to have something to show. And a lot of science fiction films and monster films, a lot of the reasons why we're here at the comic conventions is because of that as well. But the one thing that's interesting to me on here is Babbitt and Luz Barron, they were experimenting around with oscillators and tapes, and all the stuff that I can do today so easily was a chore back then. Matter of fact, they actually had one of the first tape recorders in the country. And there were people, some of these big composers that were like John Cage and so forth, and like that. Some of these folks here that dealt with music on Creek were actually wanted to kind of work with this tape technology. So when you listen to these sounds here, it's not a traditional soundtrack. So let me play a little bit of this so you can kind of hear once they get down there.
Gentlemen, would you care to see the rest?
So all these sounds here are
Feel the warm air rising.
oscillators and tapes being moved back and forth.
Sit down, gentlemen. Are you afraid?
So where is the soundtrack and where is the Foley sounds?
100 levels.
You can't really tell in this film. We're kind of used to these sounds, but back then this was brand new. What is this? And as a matter of fact, the musicians union was so upset with it, they refused to let them even call it music. They basically called it, what was it called? Electronic tonalities. So they couldn't go for the Oscar for best soundtrack because they had synthesized sounds making these. So that's kind of interesting to me. The Twilight Zone had so many great things going on. They actually had an episode where they had a young man that was kind of like a rockabilly guy. And this is like, I think, almost the last episode, actually, of the Twilight Zone, if I remember right, or getting close to it. So, that was kind of interesting part there. Even though the 2001 A Space Odyssey doesn't really deal necessarily with rock and roll sounds, the idea of using a classical soundtrack to go along with, to me, in the darkness of space and everything, to me is just fascinating. Like this here is an atonal choral work. Does it sort of sound a little bit like that Forbidden Planet sounds? And of course, the Strauss. What a juxtaposition. And you all know in space you don't hear anything because there's no oxygen, right? So. Anyways. you've all seen it before. And I always remember the very special Star Trek episode, Away to Eden, the space hippies. And you think what's going on in 1969, that they were able to get on there at the time there. So I'll play a little bit of this. And it kind of sounds like folk rock-ish, sort of.
I'm talking about you. I'm talking about me. Long time back when the galaxy was new.
You see all the Starfleet officers groove into this hippie music.
Man found out what he had to do. Found he had to eat and he found he had to drink.
So what do y'all think? Here in 1969, do you think the idea of this rock and roll music had an influence on science fiction with Star Trek, with the other science fiction films out there? And the idea of some of these monster films as well? Well, we dive into going into the 70s. 70s is an interesting time in a lot of ways because there was a lot more, I don't know, darker type films in some ways, and they was like the anti-hero, and it would just like fade off to nothing, like just like end of film with nothing going on. And I think of the soundtrack for The Clockwork Orange, and that the idea of Wendy Carlos using these various synthesized sounds come along, and the idea of this Beethoven's Ode to Joy, basically. And it's kind of a juxtaposition of how violent this film is. And again, this is 1971. These sounds are sounds that people hadn't heard at the time. And you could have just played the Ninth Symphony there, but having those synthesized sounds, I think, had a really big effect. We'll jump into a little film called American Graffiti, and you might have heard the director George Lucas, and he was able to get all these kind of like a love letter to the cruising culture, and most of you young people out there never knew what cruising was. I was kind of the last end of it. We would drive around back and forth wherever the main drag of town is, and the business people didn't like it, so we'd have to stop and park, because if law enforcement saw us go more than twice, they'd give us a cruising ticket. And so you'd park for about an hour, get in someone else's car, and get in someone else's car. By that point, you can get in your original car anyways. So you can see a little bit of that going on here in American Graffiti. Modesto, California. I love those cars. And a bit actor that was trying to make it, Harrison Ford is playing the guy that's racing Mettner in this film here. And that was kind of the big ending of that film. And this is one of my favorite lines in American Graffiti.
Rock and roll has been going downhill ever since Buddy Holly died.
So if you didn't hear that, rock and roll has been going downhill ever since Buddy Holly died, because he didn't like the Beach Boys music. And once again, I think that kind of shows that the next music you don't necessarily like, but someone else likes, and it kind of progresses. And of course, we get to Star Wars, and which I don't know if we'd actually be at these comic conventions if Star Wars didn't come around and make this renaissance of love and science fiction, and the idea of these space operas going on. And of course, John Williams was a really big jazz musician as well, and he actually, if you look at the score for this, for the cantina scene, I know every film that has like an alien bar rips this completely off. And if you listen to it, I mean, it's really a jazz band going on. Da, da, da. But just because I think it's kind of interesting, it was around the disco era, and Mako comes out with their version of Star Wars theme. Why is this one louder? So anyways, you get the idea. Yeah, exactly. And Superman, it came out in '78. It had a Superman disco song as well. As a kid, I remember hearing those sounds.
I used to play the hell out of that back when I was a club DJ.
Yeah, it's got a good beat to it. Absolutely. So we get to the '80s, and again, I could talk an hour on every one of these films and the soundtrack wise, but we're just kind of doing a little coverage of it. I remember Flash Gordon, and the idea of Queen's music, the idea of Flash. If you haven't heard that before, you'll never forget it after hearing this. And the opening of the sequence of this, I think, is just amazing.
Play with.
I mean, that's that. And I love all the cartoons from Flash Gordon. It does that for a while. I'll fast forward just a little bit. And has anybody seen Flash Gordon, the film? A couple of y'all? I mean,
Who's the artist that made that?
Well, yeah, the Queen's the group that's singing that, and they're using the old cartoons from Flash Gordon in there, and it's just iconic. In some ways, I mean, I like the soundtrack. I think the soundtrack's an amazing soundtrack. And so now you're getting these rock and rollers coming out and doing soundtracks. The cartoon Heavy Metal, I remember as a kid, I believe it was rated R because they didn't have PG-13 back then, so I couldn't see it until like a lot later on. And Black Sabbath's in it, Blue Oyster Cult, Cheap Trick in there, Sammy Hagar. I'll just give you a little bit of imagery of what it looks like. So this was a film visually that has a big effect on a lot of other cartoons in this genre.
So the inspiration of Tesla.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure he probably saw Heavy Metal. I think him and I are about the same age. And Tron is another one, and the soundtrack for Tron is pretty amazing. I'm gonna play you a little scene when I'm going into Flynn's arcade, and you hear Journey in the background playing Oni Solutions. It's a little quiet in there because it's in the background.
Boy, I haven't been here in a long time.
But of course, this would be music of the vernacular, because that was music that was out in 1982. And if you don't remember, the young folks, we used to have things called arcades we used to go to and had all these video games and everything. It was great, glorious time. So they're trying to find, one of the captains of Babylon 5 is in there, which, I love. I don't know if any of y'all loves. I love Babylon 5. And Blade Runner. I can't think of another film. The look, the aesthetic, the sound has had such a major a point of this amazing music and everything like that. And the idea of the Vangles, and you'll hear it. It just without this music, I don't think you have the same film.
You heard copyright.
That atmospheric sounds, guttural, visceral sounds. I mean, this imagery is still recycled to use today for futuristic looks and everything. And I can play that all day long. Yes?
This modern sequel of it, you have more like the different still futuristic, more like those that are technically kind of.
Yes, absolutely, yeah. But if you think back in 1982, how many films has this influenced, going back that far? And there's a lot of films that have been influenced by that as well. I'm a big fan of the book 1984. I read it a bunch of times as a kid. The thing that's interesting, they actually shot this in 1984 where it was supposed to be at in the UK. And there's actually two soundtracks. There's a more traditional soundtrack, but the Eurythmics did one. And I think this sound here is not it's if you go online and listen to the theatrical or the director's cut with the orchestra part, it's interesting, but dystopian world that's going on where Big Brother's watching you, I think this sound is very effective. But here it's like looping, this ostinato. So you think of the world, and as a filmmaker and also as a composer, a lot of times I look at a scene that doesn't quite work, and if you put the right music, this cello, this something that makes the scene pop. I've seen many films that just won't work if it isn't for the soundtrack. I think Star Wars is good, but John Williams' soundtrack takes it to another level. It just does. Like Rocky, that music of Rocky's music, you just get into it. A Karate Kid, anyways, just go down the line. Another film that has a look and sound that just been influenced so many other science fiction films. Brad Fingel's soundtrack to me is just amazing. $2029, it's not too far from now. Hear that soundscape going on? The idea of this world and the soundtrack, this amplifying it. And when it gets to the title screens, this very robotic-y. I think 20 years back, it would have been a more traditional soundtrack with synthesizers, not synthesizers, but with orchestras and things. But I think that is really effective. And basic some diegetic music in there, like this is a band when she's in the club trying to get law enforcement to come protect her. And of course, a film that is so connected to rock and roll music is Back to the Future, of course. And the idea of, I remember when I saw this film in 1985, that truck looked a lot cooler than it did when we got the third film, like 1989. But if you imagine back, that's 30 years ago, it was 1955, now, what are we, 2025? So for us, it'd be like going back to 1995, right? Today, that would be the equivalent of going back. And the music didn't seem as cool to me in 1995 as it was as a comparison to this. So obviously that scene where he goes in, and I love the clever use that he is basically fading out of time when his family is breaking apart, and finally he does the kiss, and then he comes back to life, And then, of course, when he plays Johnny B. Good.
Your cousin Marvin Berry, you know that new sound you're looking for? Well, listen to this.
So it would be interesting, if someone did go back in time and was able to start rock and roll off by hearing it over the telephone because his cousin was there playing with his kid. Anyways, and then the other part I love was the just too darn loud scene where he's playing Huey Lewis's Power of Love when they're auditioning. There's Huey Lewis there, just sitting there like. You know, just too darn loud there. I got to see Huey Lewis live a bunch of years back, and I could tell he doesn't want to play The Power of Love. I was so disappointed because he ended it with Power of Love. He said, well, when I wrote this, I didn't realize I had to play it every single night I play it. And they go, bump, bump. I'm like, oh, man, don't tell me that. I just want to hear Power of Love. Anyways. I'm sure there's some Doctor Who fans out there. My doctor is Sylvester McCoy. I mean, I love the original Doctor Who sequence. And this particular episode, The Remembrance of the Daleks, I don't know if any Who fans out there have seen it in 1988. But the soundtrack, the original soundtrack, is going back to the BBC Radiophonic Workshop. And Delilah Derbyshire, if you go, there's a cool documentaries on YouTube about her experimenting with sounds and everything like that. And these sounds from Doctor Who, the original, it's just something that just pulls you right into that science fiction right there. So these are all oscillators, no traditional instruments. Now, by 1988, you can hear the difference in the kind of more MIDI sounds going on. But the one part I want to show you on here, this is 1988. They go back to 1963, and Ace goes into a cafeteria or into a restaurant to get some sandwiches, and you can hear Elvis Presley being played. He's singing "Return to Sender," and later on, there's "Return to Sender" there, and later on, playing the Beatles. Do you want to know a secret? And the other thing that I think is really cute in the scene here is that they actually mention. So the TV is on as she walks out.
This is BBC Television. The time is 5:15, and Saturday viewing continues with an adventure in the new science fiction series, Doctor.
So if you didn't hear it, the new British series, Doctor, and then it jumps right into that teletype there. And so I thought that was kind of cool, a little homage to that. So there's so many other science fiction films. I remember with Bill and Ted, they were supposed to write a song to bring their Earth together. I think, what song could they do? And so in their Bogus Journey, it's Kiss does a cover of Argent's God Gave Rock and Roll to You. I thought, okay, that could work. So it was. I was just thinking, what song could they do to have it basically, be able to do that? I remember on First Contact, Zephyr Cochrane was going to delay the trip because he didn't have, something was missing, and he finally finds his.
We can't lift off without it.
Jordy, we've got him aboard.
No, wait, I found it.
12, 11,
It's like
10,
future CD.
9, 8,
Let's rock and roll.
6.
So Steppenwolf's Magic Carpet Ride. So it goes to warp drive, and then a lot of years later, basically the penultimate episode of Voyager, Neelix plays Zephyr Cochrane's favorite rock music at the little get together for First Contact Day. And at the end there, he actually says,
Is that from Cochrane's favorite music?
and I love how they get this generic rock and roll because they want to pay royalties to like Steppenwolf on there. And kind of going into the idea, one of the coolest openings, if you haven't seen the reboot of Star Trek, playing the Beastie Boys Sabotage. And basically, jumps out of the. I don't think physics actually makes that would actually work, but.
Is there a problem, officer?
Citizen, what is your name?
My name is Jane Siberius Kirk.
Yes. Anyways, and then later on and beyond, they did that. Well, I'm almost out of time, and there's so many other films I could talk about. I guess I'll end on probably the biggest mixtape. Ah, man, there's so many. I'll do this real quick. I'm a big fan of Kick-Ass, and I love that scene there where where it flies away, and so he jumps, takes her out after he saves the day and whatnot. There's McLovin, right? There's just something about this. This scene would not be the same without this music here. And that's the reveal of that jump pack, isn't it? And so here it is without the music. It's just the scene of them flying along. I mean, it's completely different. Without the music. And so I think that's the power of the music. And one last one, of course, the idea of Guardian of the Galaxy. That's probably the biggest mixtape of them all. And as he's walking in there, singing Red Boots, Come and Get Your Love, grabbing a bunch of creatures as microphones and whatnot, going to that title screen, it's just like, yes. And of course, the dance-off is
Ooh, child, things will get brighter. Listen to these words. Ooh, child, things are gonna get easier.
Anyways, y'all see that.
Ooh, child,
So I can't think of another science fiction that uses the mixtape so well. Well, I want to thank you all so much for coming out and hearing me talk. And there's so much great influence with this science fiction music from the 50s on to this day here. And I think part of it is that rebellious spirit that filmmakers, and especially independent filmmakers, do when they make monster films and science fiction films as well and whatnot. So really thank you so much for coming over today. I got a bunch of references. And if you want to get in contact with me, there's a QR code there. There's my links there. There's my email. And if you'd like to go see a science fiction film I made called The Rise of the Robots, you can go to therobotfilm.com, and it's on Tubi, it's YouTube, it's Amazon, it's everywhere. So you can go check it out. And I really do appreciate you spending some time at Comicpalooza with me today. Thank you all so much. Have a great day. So you just do it. It's like that.